many people will have seen already, but we are going to show a couple of these videos in which people who are calling themselves Black Lives Matter protesters are approaching and being antagonistic towards restaurant goers. So, Zach, if you want to show the first video from Matt Walsh.
Put your mask on now, huh? Motherfucker. Pasty piece of shit.
Wow,
Motherfucker.
white supremacy. Hey! Get something.
And we have another one to show, but before we move on, for those who are listening only and not watching, you see one particular young woman yelling at two restaurant goers, and what has happened, I think, before the recording started, is that the mob has shown up and demanded of all of these people, most of whom are eating outside, that they raise a they raise a fist in solidarity. And we see other people, everyone else that we can see who's seated at this restaurant has raised a fist in solidarity. I would again refer to those as, don't hurt me fists. Some of them will feel like they're in solidarity, but this is the green grocer. This is the don't hurt me salute. Václav Havel's greengrocer. And you also see some of the protesters, mobsters in the foreground at the end of the video, not raising a fist, but giving a finger to the couple, the young, straight, white couple, those last two descriptives of which shouldn't matter at all, who are refusing to do what the mob has demanded of them. So let's show this first, this tweet, Barry Weiss. We found this one through Barry Weiss, Zach. And then if we could show the video that's embedded in there. So very much the same kind of scene. In this case, it looks like it's just a woman. Maybe she's sitting with someone. We don't see them being assaulted by a group of people, including in particular a young man, a young white man, who just gets right up in her face, very aggressive, very. In any other situation, I would say that was clearly a sexed interaction in which a dude is aggressively going after a woman who is sitting there and not having any of it. She too is not raising a fist. So Barry Weiss, after posting that video, which she got from another source, says, also makes me wonder, what makes particular people brave enough to stand up to a mob? Is it a rare personality? Is it strong conviction that overrides the fear? And she asks if we might have any insight. And before we start talking about that, I think this is a good time to bring up, again, as I think we did in the last episode, that famous Martin Niemöller, I need to look up his name to make sure I'm pronouncing it correctly, quotation from, about and after World War II, in which he says, first they came for the socialists and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me and there was no one left to speak for me. And I tried to modify that exquisite and unfortunately doesn't go out of fashion poem from him last time, and I didn't really nail it. And someone on YouTube who goes by Bobby B. Fat did what I think is a better job. So here's his contribution. First, they came for the socialists, and I helped them because I am not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I helped them because I am not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I helped them because I am not a Jew. Then they came for me because they no longer needed my help.
at the end, it's very frightening because to the extent that they came from me, you know what they come from me is, right? That's death. And the fact that there is no one to stand between you and it is frightening. And the fact that you don't understand that you lost your opportunity to be defended at the point that you failed to defend, it's such an obvious point at one level, and then we see the game theory fail again and again and again for, you know, exactly the reasons that Barry is asking us if we have insight into. But I wanted to go back to something about the video.
Yes.
You said that they were asked to raise a fist in solidarity.
I am inferring that from comments and such. I don't think I heard that in the videos.
I think it is exactly the inference you are supposed to take. And the thing is, it is simultaneously true and a lie, right? Solidarity with what exactly?
It is true that is presumably what they were asked to do, but is that actually, are those words actually reflective of what the gesture would mean? Is that the way in which it's a lie?
It's a lie in exactly the same way that asking people to kneel, right? We've seen many in the early parts of the protests and riots. We saw officials being asked to kneel with the protesters.
Yeah.
Kneeling is, did you kneel? Is this kneeling as in the Game of Thrones, you are showing fealty to something? Is this kneeling in solidarity? It's totally ambiguous. And so the point is, it is a physical Motte and Bailey, where the gesture has both characteristics. Now, if I raise a hand...
That's really good. A physical Motte and Bailey.
It's a physical Motte and Bailey. If I raise a fist, right, like this, in solidarity with Black Lives Matter, have I announced that I believe that Black lives are undervalued and that we have to do something about it? Or have I just embraced Black power, which is, of course, traditionally what that fist is? Now, I'm not even against the idea that a fist raised for Black power is inherently an offensive thing. I get it. But the idea that you're going to accost people and force them to make a gesture that very plausibly means that they are in favor of a Black power movement, right? With no discussion, this is...
and I guess I would say we can. It's even easier than that. I don't care what it is that a mob shows up at a restaurant asking me to do. I don't, if it's demanding that I show support for a movement that I myself founded.
Right.
Why is it that anyone should feel responsible to or forced to do that thing, no matter how firmly they are convinced that they are actually in favor of that thing? And so, I mean, these really are two separate questions, right? This thing that they're asking you to do is not what it seems, and it's obscuring a whole lot of other things. And actually, you can tell that by the fact of how they're behaving right here, right now.
Yeah.
But also, even if you're sure that the thing that you are being asked to show support for is something that you support, you should always be free to show or not show support for that thing on your own terms, under your own conditions, on your own time. And so we have these few restaurant goers resisting, even while everyone around them is sort of looking a little bit shamed and doing this thing. And how will the people who resisted versus the guy sitting next to them who didn't resist feel? How did they feel that night? How did they feel afterwards? The people who resisted were probably shaken, still scared, worried. Could they be doxxed? Could they be found? But they knew that they had resisted the thing that demanded of them something that was not okay. And the guy who avoided the mob for now, what does he do? Does he sleep? Does he sleep well? I don't think so.
There's he and there's those off camera. And this is we have to go here.
Yes.
So I agree with your formulation, and I think it's exactly right. If a group of well-intentioned people confronted us at a cafe surrounded by people, maybe they came to us and they said, so do you support Unity 2020? And we'd say, of course. And then they start, forcing other people to embrace it in the cafe. Suddenly, I'm not even on board with the support part. The point is, I don't support it if it's forced in any way. And all right, so let's get to I think it's really in part the issue that Barry is asking us to comment on, which is what happened. The people on camera, those who put up their fist and those who resisted. That's one category. And we, because of our evolutionary processing, focus on that because they are the people in the narrative. But this narrative is really not even about them, right? The person who sees that video, which is, who knows, hundreds of thousands of times as many people as were actually present, maybe millions, depending upon how far those videos go. That's the target. And I will point out, this is the exact analog of the Evergreen situation, right? The protesters flooded in, cameras out, right? The idea is whatever you do is about to be broadcast. Who do you want to be, right? Now, let's compare these two on the screen. You've got the people who raised their fist, did what they were told, irrespective of what they actually felt, right? They paid one price. Maybe they weren't comfortable being told to raise their fist and they felt weak for doing so. On the other hand, there's no focus on them, right? They are unlikely to show up anywhere. On the other hand,
they may walk away. Sorry, I know you're going somewhere, but they may walk away. Actually, some of them may walk away feeling better about the movement because they have now shown support, and it will be harder for them to walk away. And some of them, and unfortunately, I think it will be a minority, will walk away feeling worse about the movement, now questioning it in a way that they perhaps had not done before, and wonder if it can do that to people who had nothing to, with whom they had no beef. What else might it do? And they might actually begin to question the movement. I suspect, though, that will be a minority of those who, without thinking about it and without ever imagining that they would resist, didn't resist and did raise a fist in support.
Well, I will say again, Evergreen teaches us everything we need to know. There was a faculty colleague of ours, somebody who I at one point would have called a friend, who was cornered during the protests at Evergreen and was frightened by it and wrote about it, and then flipped sides because she was offered power in exchange for embracing the thing, which is, of course, the underlying dynamic here. But all right, if we go back to these cafes, right? If you don't raise a fist in that circumstance, then you are very likely, you have reason to expect that video of you not raising a fist is going to be broadcast.
Yeah.
So whether or not you are doxxed is in some sense not it, because the price to be paid for raising a fist is probably a price between you and who you were sitting with, because they're, that's the person you have to look in the eye after the thing. The person who didn't raise a fist, whatever their reason for not doing so may have been, and it may have been as good as the one you spell out. Maybe the point is, hey, you're not going to tell me when I raise a fist and when I don't. I will decide that.
This is in no way a statement about your movement.
Right.
This is a statement about you not being able to tell me what I do.
Right. It's a statement about us being equals, right? Yeah. It's a statement about maybe I'm an ally, but I'm an ally by virtue of the real meaning of that term, which is a peer relationship, not a subordinate relationship. And so in this case, solidarity, which sounds like a peer relationship,
sure
is
does.
actually subordination. But in any case, think about the asymmetry of the game theory. You're one of the anonymous people who raised their hands. It doesn't get very far. Maybe nobody even spots that you were present. Right? You're the person who doesn't raise your hand. Suddenly raise a fist. You're suddenly famous for this, right? In some sense, right? You are not now on the minds of all of the people who think it's cool to go to cafes and force people to raise a fist, right? You're on their feed as one of the resistors, and you're also broadcast everywhere else. And so this is the answer to your question, Barry, is that the game theory plays out in the mind in that moment with the, what do I do to reduce the cost of this thing? Maybe I don't want to empower this movement. I don't want to become its iconic resistor. I don't want this to dominate my life going forward. The point is, the bargain is you do whatever minimizes the chance that the camera lands on you.
But you're answering the inverse question that she asked.
Well,
she's asking what makes particular people brave enough to stand up to a mob. So you are explaining, and this also warrants explanation. It warrants both the question being asked and it being answered. What explains the vast majority of people? And I've seen numbers in the range of like 98, 99% of people who will raise the fist. And we have that is the answer you are providing right now. But really what we need is to provide people not just sort of a litany of you might have these characteristics, in which case you might be more likely to resist such demands should a mob come for you, but also what is it that you can be thinking of in the moment that will allow you to have the courage in the moment to resist?
All right, but this is where this gets so complicated. I agree with you that the question I answered is the inverse of the question she asked, but it also, I think, contains the indicator of the question, of the answer to the question she did ask. Unfortunately, this is personal. It'd be much better if I wasn't the guy in those evergreen videos. The thing that people need to understand, and I keep saying it, and I think people don't quite get what I'm saying. Why did I do what I did, confronted with students armed with cameras portraying me as a racist who wanted me to simply embrace their movement publicly so that they would go away and harass someone else? There was never a choice. It never occurred to me, literally did not occur to me that that was an option on the table. Still doesn't. I know formally it's an option on the table, but I do not register it as one because something about my development produced a program in which that's just not an option on the table, right? It's like a keyboard without an accent on it, right? There may be some keystroke you could use to get there, but it's not on the keyboard.
But help everyone else out here. Like how do other people without that very particular and, perhaps unique in the world trait that doesn't even register going along as an option even for a moment, how do the rest of us not only dismiss that as an option in the moment, but really just relegate it to the netherworld?
So I'm not ruling it out. What I'm saying is the thing that you're looking for is the answer, whatever it was that developmentally produced, and it's not just me. It's lots of people, but it's rare.
I've never heard anyone else describe exactly what you're saying because there are many of us who will stand up to these things.
Yep.
But the way that you describe this is so absolute, and that kind of absolute, like actually you don't have to worry in the moment about what choice you will make because actually there is no choice. Is a kind of framing that might be useful for some people who might otherwise find themselves unsure how it is that they need to act in the moment.
So there is development, and then there are hacks that substitute for development. And I think the question that people are really asking, and I do get asked this a fair amount, I think the thing that people, they don't know. When I was teaching, I always used to say to students, please answer the question I should have asked you rather than the one I did ask you. Because very often students will answer the question you did ask when the right question is right next door and you'll discover it a week later. And so I'm going to answer the question that people should ask, which is how do I bootstrap the developmental structure to get there? Because I know my logical mind knows that that's who I want to be.
How do I override the amygdala in the moment and do the right thing?
Right. And I would argue that this is actually, this is something I don't know how they do it in the military, but the military manages to take people and reschedule their system of incentives so that they are capable of effectively being ordered to engage in heroism or something like this. Now, I'm not arguing that that's the right structure here, but my point is,
unfortunately, there's also a certain degree of depersonalization and such that is not what we would want to be seen as advocating for.
It's why it's not the right answer in this case. But what it is a proof of concept that there is an answer to this question that can be systematized. Now, I'm not arguing for a systemic answer. And in fact, the poem that you read about first they came from the socialists.
For the socialists?
First they came for the socialists is it is a hack to the extent that you have that thing resident in your mind. Some part of you actually knows that thing. So the question is, does that thing arise in your mind at the point that they, come for you?
So, I mean, that is one of the things that poetry is for, right? That because it's in verse, it's easier to call up, it's easier to have remembered in the first place, and it is more likely to come up into your mind at the point that a mob shows up. Right.
And the other thing is an analog. I've argued in a couple places, I think I did an early video on wisdom. And I argued something that then, after I released my video, it turns out a lot of people have made an argument similar to this in various different places. But the argument is that wisdom is either very tightly related with or synonymous with delayed gratification. That the idea is we are all, as children, unable to regulate our desire to have that thing.
Yeah.
And that there are many things that in order to have the thing you really want, you have to be able to forego some superficial substitute for it in the short term.
Yeah. I think the marshmallow test somehow got revealed as not being what it was claiming to be, but it still looms large for me as an example of this. God, it's so noisy out there today.
So yes, whether or not the marshmallow test is or is not valid, like the Stanford prison experiment may or may not be valid, it resonates because we all know that there's something to this. And we all watch children unable to regulate their desire for that thing and foregoing something much better. And so the adults we respect are almost always people who have figured out how to put off some instant gratification for a delayed gratification. And the farther you can delay that gratification, the more powerful this process is. And frankly, the thing that's really hard to grasp is that our society has caused us to become very deeply focused on self as individual. And this is understandable, but as important as self is also part of something, right? How important is yourself if the things that you do to keep yourself, we're watching people of means fleeing major cities, even as they are politically paralyzed from doing anything interesting, right? They're saving themselves and they are not taking any risk on behalf of the larger entity on which we all depend. That is going to result sooner or later in that entity failing. And we are actually, when you're watching Americans confronting other Americans in cafes and portraying them as racist or otherwise defective for not being willing to comply with an order, you're watching the failure of the U.S. And so the point is registering the value of that which is lost if you act in the moment in the way that you are being incentivized to act is the key. Can you do...
No, I gotta push back against it. It's far too analytical. Like there's no way that it works at that level. In part because, what you're saying is people are thinking too much about themselves and not enough about something bigger. And I would argue it's actually exactly the opposite. That people that this, what is it that some people have that allows them to stand up to a mob? Well, having this character trait of being Ash negative, which is something that your brother has talked about and we have talked about before, right?
Yep.
Like of not conforming to expectations of the people around you when they are patently lying, right? So that's what the Ash experiment from the 50s revealed, and later repeats. There have been hundreds, I think, of replications of that, and that was originally just male undergraduates, and it's been done now in across a number of people. And one of the things we find, for instance, is that women are more likely to fall prey to the Ash conformity of peer pressure, basically, even when these peers who are new to them and they will probably never see again, and they are patently telling a falsehood about what it is they see before them, women are more likely than men to conform. And that doesn't mean that all women conform and no men conform, nor does it mean that you can't change yourself, but sort of recognizing conformity to peer pressure, to social pressure, as something that you are engaging in the moment when the mob is there, and saying, you know what, no, who am I? Who am I when I go back and try to sleep tonight and report out to my spouse or my God or my children or my friends, whatever it is? Will I be proud to look them in the eye and say, this is what I did? Or will I look at the ground the way the guy sitting next to the resistors is, with his fist in the air, knowing that he does not want to look at the camera?
But I don't understand. I understand everything you just said, and of course I resonate with it. What I don't understand is where the disagreement is, because I feel like we're talking about the same thing.
I think in the moment, it's so easy. It's too easy to be in that room. I mean, so this is maybe the framing is, as you have said many times elsewhere, the room is not the room. right? The room is in fact the internet where this thing is going to get played out. But in the moment, in the room, are understandable millions of years of human and pre-human evolution cause us to look around and try to fit to some degree, especially if some are threatening violence against us. How do you just get out of this situation right now? You are asking for people to imagine maybe a bigger us, a bigger group that will be better served by resistance, but that requires staying in the groupthink and sort of moving through the emotion into a purely analytical, purely abstract space that also doesn't refer back to who you are at your core identity. And I think that those two sort of extremes of who you are as an individual and who you are proud to be and who you want to aspire to be and how successful are you being at becoming that best of all possible yous. And how is it that society can be best for all people? That those are the two sort of things that we would try to maximize, and that intermediate social group is the one that is most likely to get you to behave badly. And I think that in the moment, referring back to yourself and your individual self and whether or not you're going to be able to sort of live with yourself is going to be much more likely to succeed than imagining the greater abstraction.
Okay, now I know why we're disagreeing.
Okay.
Let's imagine 3 states. There's self, which is local in space and time to me. There's future self, which is local to me, but not in time. That is to say, how am I going to feel an hour after this interaction? How am I going to feel a year after this interaction? And then there's self, but bigger. That is to say, I'm part of something that I'm actually dependent on. And ultimately, if that thing fails, the cost to me is absolute. Right? I think all of these things are the same. They result in the same alteration of the thought process in the moment. And I would just point out, and let's take the evergreen situation because it was simple and because we know the context of it, right? I didn't have a choice. I wouldn't have had a choice if I had been alone. But I was also there in front of my students, right? For me to have a choice in that moment would have left me completely hypocritical with respect to everything I had represented to them as true. That doubly made it no choice.
So you had already publicly defined yourself as who you were on the inside, and therefore to cave to the mob would have been a public act of hypocrisy, which won't be true for most people. And so maybe one of the things you're arguing is, in advance of any such mob coming for you, begin to make public in small ways who you know yourself to be, so that you have to answer to the self that you've already established yourself to be.
I believe this is exactly correct. And the reason people don't do it in general is that they will begin to lose friends. And this goes to something...
We are hearing from many of them.
This goes to something you and I have said on multiple occasions, which is that one thing that was crystal clear about the Evergreen situation was that it revealed everybody's character. Now, the fact is, the people that I might have thought were our friends who turned on us, I would rather not have had them as acquaintances in the run-up to the thing, because what they were was unreliable. And what you need is friends who are reliable. So
it's better to know.
It's better to know as early as possible. And so to the extent that you see
this... It's
still
sad, but it's better to know.
The only thing I find sad about it is their failure of character, right? The fact that that weakness is so widespread is sad. I don't find it personally sad.
I mourn the narrative that I thought was true.
I agree, and I'm stunned by some of the things we saw, but I would say the other side of that is not, well, you're going to lose friends. It's you're going to discover who you can trust, who you could find yourself in a foxhole with and be glad that they were the ones there. And so faculty almost universally disappointed us. They didn't all turn on us, right? Many of the people that we were friends with were silent, which is frustrating.
Or privately supportive.
But they did not attack us. There were attacks from a number of different people. But the number of people, especially on the student side, who shined, right, was more than compensation for
So
all
many.
of the people who were weak. And so I think you're right that the hack that is useful is to explore this ahead of time, such that the structure that is there at the point that you are confronted with that camera knows why you did what you did. So two other things I think we should say is, one, I don't see any reason to imagine that the people who didn't raise their fist had the slightest bit of racism to them. But even if they did, the point is, this is not how we interact with each other, right? It is one thing to disagree with people. It is another thing to weaponize stigma in order to control them. That is completely unacceptable. It is obviously a threat that's being leveled in public, and we all have an absolute obligation to resist its being wielded, right? No good will come of this, and it certainly will not be good for Black lives or any other group of Americans.